What if the oldest banned book on Earth contains proof that humanity was never alone? Somewhere in the Ethiopian highlands, locked inside monasteries older than most nations, sits a text that religious authorities spent 17 centuries trying to erase. A book so dangerous that church councils ordered every copy burned. A text so strange that scholars who read it in the 1800s thought it had to be fiction. But then the Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed that the Book of Enoch was ancient, authentic, and filled with descriptions of beings descending from the sky, sharing advanced knowledge with primitive humans, and creating a hybrid race of giants that nearly consumed the world. This is the story that religion tried to bury. And tonight, we are going to dig it up. This series presents the Book of Enoch and its extraordinary connections to the ancient alien hypothesis through quiet storytelling, allowing knowledge to be absorbed without noticing while you rest, work, or unwind. Let the words settle gently. There is nothing to focus on, just ancient mysteries finding their way in. Let us begin where all forbidden things begin, with a man who was too curious and a sky that held too many secrets. In the 5th chapter of Genesis, buried in a long list of names and lifespans, there is a single verse that has haunted theologians for thousands of years. It describes a man named Enoch, the 7th patriarch from Adam, the great-grandfather of Noah. Unlike everyone else in that genealogy, Enoch does not die. The text simply says, he walked with God, and then he was gone, because God took him. That is it. 2 sentences, no explanation, no destination. Just a man who walked into the unknown and never came back. But what if those 2 sentences are not the full story? What if an entire library of revelation was hidden behind that single, tantalizing verse? The Book of Enoch claims to be exactly that. The missing account of what Enoch saw, where he went, and what he learned during his extraordinary journey beyond the boundaries of human experience. And the things it describes are not what you would expect from a religious text written centuries before the Common Era. The book speaks of beings who descended from the heavens to a specific mountain. It describes advanced knowledge being transmitted to early humans: metallurgy, astronomy, medicine, cosmetics, even weather prediction. It tells of genetic mixing between these sky beings and human women, producing a race of giants whose appetite and violence nearly ended civilization itself. For mainstream scholars, these are myths and metaphors, the colorful imagination of ancient Jewish writers grappling with the problem of evil. But for a growing community of researchers, historians, and independent thinkers, the Book of Enoch reads less like mythology and more like a report. An ancient witness account of something that actually happened, filtered through the only language and concepts available to people who had no word for spacecraft, no concept of genetics, and no framework for understanding visitors from another world. The question is not simply whether the Book of Enoch is true. The question is, why were the people in power so determined to make sure you never read it? To understand why this book was feared, you first need to understand what it contains. The Book of Enoch is not a single text. It is a collection of 5 distinct works, each written at different times between roughly 300 and 100 years before the birth of Christ, though the oral traditions behind them may stretch back much further. Together, these 5 books form a sweeping cosmic drama that makes the canonical Bible look like an abridged edition. The first and most famous section is the Book of the Watchers. Here we encounter the central figures that drive the entire narrative. A class of angelic beings called the Watchers, whose original purpose was to observe humanity from their posts in the heavens. 200 of these beings, led by a figure named Semjaza, made a fateful decision. They looked down at the daughters of early humans, found them beautiful, and chose to descend to Earth. But this was no gentle visitation. The Book of Enoch describes these beings gathering on the summit of Mount Hermon, a real mountain on the border of modern-day Lebanon and Syria, and swearing a collective oath. They bound themselves by a curse, promising that none would abandon the plan. Then they descended. Now pause here for a moment, because the details matter enormously. These beings do not simply arrive and integrate, they bring gifts. Azazel teaches humans how to forge weapons of war, swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, and how to extract and work metals from the earth. He teaches women to adorn themselves with precious stones and cosmetics. Semjaza teaches the cutting of roots and the art of enchantments. Others teach astrology, the reading of cloud patterns, the tracking of celestial bodies, the interpretation of signs in the earth and sky. Each watcher contributes a specific area of expertise, not vague mysticism, but practical, applied knowledge, the kind of knowledge that, in the ancient world, would have represented a staggering technological leap. Think about what is being described. A group of beings arrives from the sky. They land on a mountain. They share advanced technical knowledge with a primitive population. And then they interbreed with the local inhabitants. If you strip away the religious language, if you remove the words angels and heaven, what remains sounds remarkably like something else entirely. Here is where the story takes its darkest turn, and where the ancient alien interpretation becomes almost impossible to ignore. The unions between the Watchers and human women produce offspring, but these are not ordinary children. The Book of Enoch calls them the Nephilim, a Hebrew word meaning the fallen ones, or those who cause others to fall. The text describes them as giants of extraordinary size, with appetites to match. At first, they consume the produce of humanity, crops, livestock, resources. When that is not enough, they turn on humans themselves. And when even human flesh cannot satisfy them, they begin consuming each other. The image is monstrous, yes, but consider it through a different lens. What if the giants were not literally hundreds of feet tall, as some translations suggest, but rather a genetically distinct population, larger, stronger, more aggressive, the result of hybridization between two incompatible biological lines? Across the ancient world, from Mesopotamia to Greece to the Americas, cultures that had no contact with one another all preserved stories of a time when beings from the sky mixed with humans and produced a race of powerful, oversized, and often violent offspring. The Greeks remembered them as the Titans. Norse mythology called them the Jotnar. Native American traditions from coast to coast preserve accounts of giant cannibals who once roamed the land. The Sumerian king lists describe antediluvian rulers who reigned for thousands of years, their authority declining as corruption spread. Are all of these cultures remembering the same event? The same visitors? The same catastrophic experiment? The Book of Enoch does not ask you to speculate. It tells you directly. The Watchers came from the sky. They mated with humans. Their offspring were monsters. And the knowledge they brought, the weapons, the metallurgy, the astronomical data, became the seeds of humanity's corruption. There is a heaviness in that idea, a weight that settles in the chest when you consider its implications. If the story is even partially based on real events, then the foundations of human civilization may not be entirely our own. The fire that launched us forward may have been lit by hands that were not human. Let us travel now from the mountains of ancient Palestine to the river valleys of Mesopotamia, because the Book of Enoch does not exist in isolation. Its stories find haunting parallels in the oldest written records on Earth, the clay tablets of ancient Sumer. The Sumerians, who built the first known cities in what is now southern Iraq, spoke of beings called the Anunnaki, a name that translates roughly to those who from heaven came to earth. According to Sumerian texts like the Enuma Elish and the Atrahasis epic, these beings descended from the sky, established settlements, and took a direct hand in shaping human civilization. They taught the arts of agriculture, architecture, mathematics, and law. They established kingship. They organized societies. The parallels with the Book of Enoch are extraordinary. Both traditions describe beings who arrive from the heavens. Both speak of these beings interacting intimately with humans. Both connect these visitors to an explosion of knowledge and technological capability. Both describe the eventual corruption of this arrangement, leading to catastrophic consequences. A great flood that resets civilization itself. But here is where the two traditions diverge in a fascinating way. In the Sumerian version, the Anunnaki are largely portrayed as benefactors, powerful gods who give humanity the tools of civilization. In the Book of Enoch, however, the Watchers are rebels. Their descent is unauthorized. Their sharing of knowledge is a transgression. The Sumerian account reads like history written by the visitors. The Enochic account reads like history written by those who suffered the consequences. Which version is closer to the truth? Or are they both fragments of the same shattered mirror, each reflecting a different angle of an event so vast that no single culture could capture it whole? The ancient astronaut theorist Zecharia Sitchin spent decades arguing that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial beings from a planet he called Nibiru. His work, while widely criticized by mainstream scholars, raised a question that refuses to go away. How did a civilization spring up in Mesopotamia seemingly out of nowhere, complete with mathematics, complex astronomy, civil engineering, banking, legal systems, and written literature? That is a massive leap forward for a species that, according to conventional archaeology, had only recently transitioned from hunting and gathering. Something catalyzed that leap. The Sumerians said it was the Anunnaki. The Book of Enoch said it was the Watchers. Perhaps they were both describing the same visitors, separated by geography and filtered through different cultural lenses. Now we must follow Enoch himself on the journey that makes his book unlike anything else in ancient literature. Because Enoch does not merely observe the Watchers from a distance, he is summoned. The text describes how two beings appear before Enoch, beings unlike anything he has ever seen. They are extraordinarily tall. Their faces shine like the sun. Their eyes burn like lamps. Fire flows from their lips. They wear garments that shimmer like feathers, and their wings are brighter than gold. They tell Enoch not to be afraid and command him to come with them to deliver a message to the fallen Watchers. Stop and read that description again. Tall beings, luminous faces, eyes like burning lamps, fire from their lips, garments like feathers, wings of gold. If you had never encountered advanced technology, if your entire frame of reference was the ancient world of animal skins and stone tools, how would you describe a being in a pressurized suit with illuminated visor panels, communication equipment near the mouth, and some form of personal flight apparatus? The Book of Enoch is asking us to see through ancient eyes. And what those eyes saw was not magic. It was something they had no words for. Enoch is then taken on a journey that defies the boundaries of his earthly existence. He describes being lifted into the heavens, passing through walls of crystal surrounded by tongues of fire. He sees structures that cannot exist on earth, buildings of light, rivers of flame, mountains of darkness. He is brought before a great throne where he receives divine judgment to deliver back to the Watchers. Ancient astronaut proponents argue that what Enoch is describing is a journey aboard a craft of some kind, a vessel that carries him beyond the atmosphere and into an orbital structure or station. The walls of crystal could be transparent viewing panels. The tongues of fire could be propulsion systems. The throne room could be a command center. This interpretation is, of course, speculative, but it gains a peculiar weight when you place it alongside another biblical account, the vision of the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a Jewish priest living in Babylonian exile around the 6th century before Christ. One day, while standing by the Chebar River in Iraq, he witnessed something that would become one of the most analyzed passages in all of Scripture. He describes a great windstorm approaching from the north, a massive cloud surrounded by flashing lightning and brilliant light. From within this cloud emerge 4 living creatures, each with multiple faces and wings, accompanied by a structure of spinning wheels. Wheels within wheels with rims covered in eyes, sparkling like chrysolite. Above the creatures, Ezekiel sees something like a vault of crystal, and above the vault, a throne. And upon the throne, a figure that radiates the appearance of glowing metal surrounded by fire. Traditional theology interprets this as a vision of the divine, a cherubim throne, a manifestation of God's glory. But in 1968, a Swiss hotel manager named Erich von Daniken published a book called Chariots of the Gods and offered a radically different interpretation. Von Daniken suggested that Ezekiel had witnessed the landing of an extraterrestrial spacecraft, and that his description, the windstorm, the flashing lights, the crystalline dome, the omnidirectional wheels, was the best a 6th century priest could manage when confronted with technology beyond his comprehension. Von Daniken's book sold over 65 million copies worldwide and launched the ancient astronaut movement into mainstream consciousness. His ideas were dismissed by scholars and embraced by millions. But here is the detail that even skeptics find difficult to dismiss entirely. In the 1970s, a NASA engineer named Joseph Blumrich set out to debunk von Daniken's interpretation of Ezekiel. Blumrich was a rocket scientist. He had worked on the Saturn V launch vehicle and the Skylab program. He was confident that a careful engineering analysis would expose the absurdity of the ancient astronaut reading. Instead, Blumrich concluded that the description in Ezekiel was consistent with a feasible spacecraft design. He went on to publish his own book, The Spaceships of Ezekiel, in 1974, in which he presented detailed technical drawings of the craft he believed Ezekiel had witnessed. He even filed a patent for an omnidirectional wheel system inspired by the biblical description. Was Blumrich right? Was Ezekiel's vision a spacecraft? Mainstream scholars remain firmly opposed to the idea, pointing out that the passage employs standard ancient Near Eastern iconography. Cherubim thrones, celestial imagery, and symbolic language that would have been immediately recognizable to Ezekiel's original audience. The eyes on the wheels likely represent divine omniscience. The multiple faces symbolize God's power over all creation. The crystal vault is a traditional image of heaven's firmament, but the fact remains that 2 ancient texts, Enoch and Ezekiel, both describe human beings being taken on journeys by luminous beings, associated with fire, wheels, crystal structures, and flight. They describe these experiences not as dreams, but as physical events with verifiable locations and consequences. And they come from a culture that had no concept of powered flight, no understanding of orbital mechanics, and no reason to invent such imagery unless something had been witnessed. The reach of these ancient accounts extends far beyond the Middle East, and that is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of all. In India, ancient Sanskrit texts describe flying vehicles called Vimanas in extraordinary detail. The Ramayana, one of the great Hindu epics, features the Pushpaka Vimana, an aerial chariot described as resembling the sun, capable of traveling at the speed of thought, with room for an unlimited number of passengers. The Mahabharata describes the hero Arjuna ascending to heaven in a Vimana, where he sees thousands of airborne chariots and a massive craft, 7 stories tall. The Vaimanika Shastra, a Sanskrit text that claims to describe the construction and operation of Vimanas, includes details about propulsion systems involving mercury, heating chambers, and materials that some researchers have compared to advanced alloys. A 1974 study by engineers at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore dismissed the text's aircraft designs as technically unfeasible, but the sheer specificity of the descriptions, the number of decks, the positioning of engines, the types of metals, raises the question of where such detailed concepts originated in a pre-industrial culture. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, the Dogon people of Mali in West Africa have preserved astronomical knowledge that has baffled anthropologists for nearly a century. When French researchers Marcel Griaule and Germaine Dieterlen studied the Dogon in the 1930s and 1940s, they discovered that the tribe possessed detailed knowledge of the Sirius star system, including the existence of Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye that was not confirmed by Western astronomers until the 1970s. The Dogon knew about its 50-year elliptical orbit, its extreme density, and even spoke of a possible third star in the system, Sirius C, which remains a subject of scientific speculation. When asked how they possessed such knowledge, the Dogon elders said it came from the Nomos, amphibious non-human beings who arrived from the Sirius system long ago and shared the knowledge of the stars with their ancestors. The mainstream scientific explanation, championed by astronomer Carl Sagan, among others, is that the Dogon likely acquired this information from European visitors in the 19th or early 20th century. But the Dogon possess artifacts over 400 years old that depict their astronomical understanding, and the specificity of their knowledge, the orbital period, the density of the companion star, the 3-star structure, goes beyond casual cultural exchange. Are the Dogon remembering the same visitors that Enoch described? Are India's Vimanas the same kind of craft that carried Ezekiel across the sky? Is the Book of Enoch one chapter in a global story that every ancient culture tells in its own way? The story of visitors from the stars who came, who taught, who changed us, and then departed or were driven away. There is a loneliness in that idea, a profound, echoing ache that settles when you consider the possibility that the most important event in human history, contact with another intelligence, happened so long ago that it has decayed into myth, that the truth was written down by witnesses who did their best to record what they saw, and then the authorities of subsequent centuries decided it was too dangerous, too destabilizing, too threatening to the established order to be allowed to survive. Because that is precisely what happened to the Book of Enoch. In the earliest centuries of Christianity, the Book of Enoch was widely read, quoted, and revered. The early church father Tertullian considered it scripture. Clement of Alexandria cited it extensively. The author of the New Testament Book of Jude directly quotes from Enoch by name, treating it as genuine prophecy. For the first 3 centuries of the Christian era, the Book of Enoch was part of the intellectual and spiritual furniture of the faith. Then came the Great Consolidation. As the Christian Church grew in power and political influence, its leaders began the process of deciding which texts would be included in the official canon and which would be excluded. In 367 CE, Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria issued his famous Easter letter listing the books he considered canonical. The Book of Enoch was not among them. The Council of Laodicea, held around 363 to 364 CE, established a formal list of accepted books and excluded apocryphal texts including Enoch. Why? The official reasons included doctrinal inconsistency, disputed authorship, and the book's elaborate mythology about fallen angels and cosmic geography, which did not align with the emerging theological consensus. But there may have been a deeper, more pragmatic reason. The Book of Enoch presented a universe that was bigger, stranger, and more populated than the Church was comfortable admitting. Its vision of multiple heavens, of angelic rebels with individual names and specific areas of expertise, of cosmic prisons and divine courts. This was a cosmology that empowered the imagination and undermined central authority. A church that was positioning itself as the sole mediator between God and humanity had little use for a text that described ordinary men being transported to heaven's throne room and given tours of the cosmos by luminous beings. The Book of Enoch was too much, too vivid, too specific, too hard to control. And so, across most of the Christian world, the scribes stopped copying it. The libraries let their copies crumble. Within a few centuries, the Book of Enoch had vanished from Western consciousness entirely. It became a ghost, a title referenced in footnotes, a whisper among scholars who knew it had once existed but could not find a single copy. But the story did not end there. Because in one corner of the world, far from the reach of European church councils and the politics of canonization, the Book of Enoch survived. High in the Ethiopian highlands, where an ancient and independent form of Christianity took root in the 4th century, the book continued to be read, copied, and revered as Holy Scripture. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church never excluded it from their canon. For more than 1,500 years, Ethiopian monks preserved the complete text in their liturgical language of Ge'ez, copying it by hand generation after generation, while the rest of the world forgot it existed. Then, in the late 18th century, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce arrived in Ethiopia. Bruce was searching for the source of the Nile, but he found something equally extraordinary. 3 complete copies of the Book of Enoch, still treasured by Ethiopian monks. He brought one back to Europe in 1773. For decades, few paid attention. The text was in Ge'ez, a language almost nobody in Europe could read. But in 1821, a professor at Oxford named Richard Lawrence produced the first English translation, and the book began its slow return from the dead. More scholars took notice. More translations followed. And then, in the mid-20th century, came the discovery that transformed everything. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd tossed a stone into a cave near the Dead Sea and heard it strike pottery. Inside the cave, and in 10 others found nearby over the following years, archaeologists and treasure hunters would discover the remains of approximately 1,000 ancient scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls, widely considered the most important archaeological find of the 20th century. Among them, in Cave 4 near the settlement of Qumran, researchers found 11 Aramaic manuscripts containing portions of the Book of Enoch. These fragments were not Ethiopian copies. They were not medieval reproductions. They were originals, written in Aramaic, the language of Jesus himself, and dated to the 2nd and 3rd centuries before Christ. The Dead Sea Scrolls proved that the Book of Enoch was genuinely ancient. It was not a medieval forgery. It was not a fringe curiosity. It was a text that the Jewish community at Qumran considered important enough to copy multiple times and store alongside the books of the Hebrew Bible. In fact, Fragments of Enoch were found in greater numbers than many canonical biblical books. The book that the Church had spent centuries trying to erase was real. It was old, and it was coming back. So where does this leave us? What do we do with a text that describes beings descending from the sky, sharing advanced knowledge, breeding with humans, and creating hybrid offspring? A text that was considered holy scripture for centuries before being deliberately suppressed. The honest answer is that we do not know, and perhaps that uncertainty is itself the most important thing. The ancient astronaut hypothesis, the idea that extraterrestrial beings visited Earth in the remote past and influenced the development of human civilization, remains firmly outside the boundaries of mainstream academic acceptance. Scholars and archaeologists classify it as pseudoscience, pointing out that its proponents often cherry-pick evidence, ignore context, and impose modern technological concepts onto ancient texts that were never meant to be read as engineering reports. These criticisms have merit. It is true that ancient peoples used rich, symbolic, and metaphorical language. It is true that cherubim thrones and cosmic geography were standard features of ancient Near Eastern literature. It is true that the Vaimanika Shastra, with its detailed descriptions of Mercury-powered aircraft, dates only to the early 20th century and was allegedly received through psychic channeling, not recovered from ancient archives. It is true that claims of giant skeletons being discovered and covered up by institutions like the Smithsonian have been repeatedly debunked. The photographs were digitally manipulated, the stories originated from satirical websites, and no verifiable physical evidence of a race of giants has ever been produced. It is important to hold these facts clearly, because the pursuit of truth requires honesty about what we know and what we do not know. But it is equally important to acknowledge what mainstream scholarship struggles to explain. How did the Sumerians develop a fully formed civilization with sophisticated mathematics, astronomical knowledge, and written language in a time frame that seems impossibly compressed? Why do cultures separated by oceans and millennia, cultures with no known contact, all preserve remarkably similar stories of beings who descended from the heavens, taught humans, and sometimes interbred with them? Why was the Book of Enoch, a text that early Christians considered prophecy, so threatening to institutional power that it had to be systematically removed from the record? These are not questions that demand extraterrestrial answers, but they are questions that deserve more than dismissal. Before we draw our final conclusions, there is another dimension to this mystery that deserves careful attention: the Nephilim themselves, and the question of whether any physical evidence supports their existence. Throughout history, reports of giant human skeletons have surfaced with remarkable regularity. In the 19th century, American newspapers published hundreds of accounts describing enormous skeletal remains unearthed from burial mounds across North America. Bones that allegedly belonged to individuals standing 7, 8, even 10 feet tall. These stories fueled a persistent legend that a race of giants once walked the earth, and that institutions like the Smithsonian deliberately suppressed the evidence to protect the established narrative of human evolution. It is a compelling story, but here is where intellectual honesty requires us to pause and examine the evidence clearly. In 2014, a widely shared article claimed that the Smithsonian Institution had been forced by a Supreme Court ruling to release classified documents proving the destruction of thousands of giant skeletons. The story was traced to World News Daily Report, a satirical website. The Smithsonian confirmed it was false. Similarly, photographs purporting to show giant skeletons being excavated have been repeatedly exposed as digital fabrications, many originating from a Photoshop competition where artists created realistic-looking archaeological hoaxes. One of the most famous images showing a massive skeleton surrounded by workers was created by a digital artist who later expressed bewilderment at how readily people accepted it as genuine. The 19th century newspaper accounts present a more complex picture. The reports were numerous and specific, often naming the excavators, the locations, and the measurements. But anthropologist Alice Hrdlicka, curator at the Smithsonian, investigated many of these claims in the 1930s and attributed them to a combination of wishful thinking, amateur archaeology, and the misidentification of animal bones, particularly mastodon and mammoth remains, which can superficially resemble oversized human bones to an untrained eye. Does this mean the Nephilim never existed? Not necessarily, but it means that the physical evidence currently available does not meet the standard of scientific verification. The Book of Enoch's descriptions of giants hundreds of feet tall are almost certainly literary exaggeration, the kind of escalation that occurs naturally when stories are passed orally through generations. But a population of unusually large individuals, the result of some form of hybridization or simply genetic variation, is not outside the bounds of possibility. We know that conditions like pituitary gigantism can produce individuals of extraordinary height, even today. What we do not have is a verified skeleton, a DNA sample, or an archaeological site that conclusively demonstrates the existence of a distinct race of giants in the ancient world. The absence of evidence, as they say, is not evidence of absence, but it is a reason for caution. The Book of Enoch's power lies not in its potential as a physical anthropology textbook, but in the questions it raises about the nature of knowledge, the origins of civilization, and the relationship between humanity and whatever else may share this universe with us. Let us turn now to another fascinating thread in this story, the astronomical knowledge encoded in the Book of Enoch that seems curiously ahead of its time. The third section of the Book of Enoch, known as the Astronomical Book or the Book of the Heavenly Luminaries, is perhaps the least discussed but most scientifically intriguing portion of the text. In this section, Enoch is guided by an angelic being named Uriel through a detailed tour of the heavens. He is shown the motions of the sun and moon, the mechanics of the seasons, the relationship between celestial bodies, and a solar calendar of 364 days, divided into 4 quarters of 91 days each. Now, the astronomy in the Book of Enoch is not flawless by modern standards. The text assumes a flat Earth covered by a dome, with the sun entering and exiting through openings at the edges of the sky. This is consistent with the cosmological understanding of the ancient Near East, and critics rightly point out that no genuine extraterrestrial tutor would teach such a geocentric model. But consider this from a different angle. What if the astronomical knowledge was genuine, but the conceptual framework used to interpret it was limited by the observer's pre-existing worldview? If you showed a Bronze Age farmer the orbital mechanics of the solar system, he would inevitably translate what he saw into the only terms he understood: gates, chariots, paths across a dome. The data might be accurate even if the model used to express it is primitive. What makes the astronomical book remarkable is not the cosmological model itself, but the specificity and systematic nature of the data. The 364-day calendar, while inaccurate by our standards, was used by the Qumran community and appears to have been an active competitor to the lunisolar calendar, eventually adopted by mainstream Judaism. The detailed tracking of solar and lunar positions, the attention to equinoxes and solstices, the classification of star groups. These suggest a tradition of serious, organized astronomical observation that goes beyond casual stargazing. When you place this alongside the Dogon's knowledge of Sirius B, the Sumerian understanding of planetary cycles, the Mayan calendar's extraordinary long count accuracy, and the precise astronomical alignments built into Egyptian pyramids and Stonehenge, a pattern emerges. Across the ancient world, cultures that should not have possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge appear to have had it anyway. Each culture credits this knowledge to beings who came from the sky. Coincidence? Cultural diffusion? Independent discovery? Or evidence of a common source? A source that the Book of Enoch identifies as the Watchers and that other cultures call by other names. There is a thread that connects all of these traditions, and it runs through one of the most fundamental human emotions: the feeling of being watched. The feeling that something out there is aware of us. The very name Watchers carries this weight. They are not called visitors or teachers or conquerors. They are called Watchers, beings whose primary function is observation. They are stationed in the heavens. They look down, they monitor, and at some point, they intervene. This concept of celestial observers who monitor humanity from above appears independently in traditions from every inhabited continent. The Aboriginal Australians speak of sky beings who watch over the dreaming. The Hopi of North America describe the Kachinas, spirit beings from the stars who observe and guide human affairs. The ancient Egyptians believed that the gods watched human actions and weighed the heart of every soul against the feather of Ma'at after death. Even the modern concept of a guardian angel, a supernatural being assigned to watch over an individual, may trace its roots to the same deep, cross-cultural intuition. Are these all reflections of the same phenomenon? Are the Watchers of the Book of Enoch, the Anunnaki of Sumer, the Nomos of the Dogon, and the Kachinas of the Hopi all different names for the same experience? An encounter with non-human intelligence that occurred so far in the past that it has been refracted into 1,000 different cultural prisms? Or is this simply how human minds work? Are we a species that cannot help but feel observed, cannot help but project intelligence onto the empty sky, cannot help but populate the darkness with faces and names? Both possibilities carry a kind of melancholy. If we are truly alone, then our myths of sky beings are the most beautiful and sustained act of collective wishful thinking in the history of consciousness. And if we are not alone, then the silence of the sky in our modern age, the absence of any confirmed signal, any undeniable proof, any new descent upon Mount Hermon, is a silence that aches in a different way entirely. The Book of Enoch does not answer this question, but it sits with it in the way that only ancient texts can. Patiently, without resolution, holding the mystery open like a wound that has never quite healed. Perhaps the deepest lesson of the Book of Enoch has nothing to do with aliens at all. Perhaps it is about the nature of knowledge itself. The central tragedy of the Watcher story is not that beings from elsewhere visited Earth. The tragedy is what happened when they shared their knowledge. The Watchers gave humans the power to forge weapons, and the world drowned in blood. They taught the arts of adornment, and vanity replaced substance. They revealed the secrets of the stars, and humanity lost its way in superstition and fear. The knowledge itself was not evil, but it was given without wisdom, without context, without the moral infrastructure needed to use it responsibly. There is something hauntingly contemporary about that warning. We live in an age when technological knowledge accelerates at a pace that outstrips our ability to understand its consequences. We split atoms before we developed the wisdom to manage nuclear weapons. We created social media before we understood what it would do to children's mental health. We are building artificial intelligence systems of extraordinary capability while openly debating whether we have any idea how to control them. The Book of Enoch Whether you read it as theology, as mythology, or as a veiled account of contact with another intelligence, carries a message that transcends its origins. Knowledge without wisdom destroys. Power without responsibility corrupts. The fire that illuminates can also consume. These are not ancient problems. They are eternal ones. And perhaps that is why the book was suppressed. Not because it contained embarrassing stories about rebellious angels, but because it contained a truth that those in power, in any era, prefer to keep quiet. The truth that progress is not the same as wisdom, that the most dangerous gift you can give a young species is power it has not earned. As we approach the close of this journey, let us consider one final thread, the thread of return. Nearly every culture that tells the story of sky beings also tells the story of their eventual departure. The Watchers are imprisoned, the Anunnaki withdraw, the Nomos depart for Sirius. The gods of Olympus retreat behind their mountain. The message, across cultures and continents, is consistent. They were here, and then they were not. But many of these same traditions include a second message, often whispered, sometimes shouted: they will come back. The Book of Enoch itself carries this forward-looking thread through its parables and prophecies. It speaks of a figure called the Son of Man, a pre-existent, chosen being who will appear at the end of days to judge the wicked and restore the righteous. Whether this is a messianic prophecy, a reference to a returning extraterrestrial authority, or a purely symbolic expression of hope, depends entirely on the lens through which you choose to read it. But the underlying question is the same one humanity has been asking since we first looked up at the stars and felt something ancient stir in our chest, something that whispers, "You are not alone. You have never been alone." And someday, the conversation will resume. We do not know if that is true. We do not know if the Book of Enoch is history, mythology, or something in between. We do not know whether the Watchers were angels, aliens, or archetypes. We do not know if the Nephilim walked the earth or only walked through the imaginations of ancient scribes. But we know this: the book exists. The questions it raises are real, and the answers, whatever they may be, are worth pursuing, quietly, carefully, with curiosity rather than certainty, and with the humility to admit that the universe may be larger, stranger, and more populated than we have ever dared to believe. The Book of Enoch was banned, buried, and almost destroyed, but it survived. And now, after centuries of silence, it speaks again, to anyone willing to listen. There is something deeply moving about that survival. Think of the Ethiopian monks who copied these pages by hand, year after year, century after century, preserving words that the rest of the world had condemned to oblivion. They did not know that one day a Scottish explorer would arrive. They did not know about the Dead Sea Scrolls waiting in their caves. They simply believed the words mattered, and so they kept them alive. Through drought and famine and war and the slow erosion of time, until the world was finally ready to hear them again. That is the story within the story, not just of angels or aliens or giants, but of the stubborn, quiet persistence of truth, of words that refuse to die, of questions that will not be silenced, no matter how many centuries of silence are imposed upon them. Let the stories unfold slowly. There is nothing to rush toward, just knowledge finding its way in. If this journey sparked something in your mind, a question, a memory, a flicker of wonder, consider leaving a like and subscribing to Forming Knowledge quietly. Share this with someone who lies awake at night, wondering about the stars. And if you have thoughts, theories, or corrections, leave them in the comments below. This is a conversation, not a lecture. Every voice matters. Until next time, keep looking up and keep listening.